Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're heading somewhere pretty unusual, actually. Imagine a huge R&D campus. But instead of glass and steel, you're seeing, well, replicas of old European castles.
You're talking about Huawei's place in Dongguan. It's quite something. Life-size copies of Heidelberg Castle, bits of Paris, Verona. They even have a little train to shuttle people around.
It sounds completely surreal, like a Garden of Eden plopped down in the middle of this industrial powerhouse, and apparently there are black swans on the lake.
Oh, yeah. The Black Swans. That's very deliberate. It's a message from the founder, Ren Zhengfei.
A message? How so?
Well, you know the whole Black Swan event theory? Something totally unexpected and catastrophic. Ren wanted that idea front and center for his employees. A constant reminder that disaster could strike no matter how big they got. It's pretty intense for a corporate symbol.
Wow. Okay, so that mix of ambition, paranoia, and almost ruthless drive. That's what we're getting into today, right? We're diving into Huawei's history, looking at its rise and its founder, Ren Zhengfei. We're drawing heavily on Eva Dou's reporting here, her work on the company's sort of secret history.
And the big question we're tackling is, well, fundamental. How did this company, which many Western analysts thought shouldn't even be possible under a communist system, how did it manage to fuse state backing with really aggressive corporate tactics?
And then become this global giant in 5G and AI, forcing everyone to rethink assumptions about free trade, innovation, and, well, trust.
Exactly. It's a huge story. And to really grasp Huawei the giant, you have to start with the man, Ren Zhengfei, and how his own life was tangled up in China's turbulent 20th century.
So Ren's early life, what was the context there?
It was tough, really tough.
Yeah.
His father, Ren Moxon, had worked for the Nationalists before 1949.
Yeah.
So after the communists took power, well, you can imagine, he was denounced, persecuted.
That must have left a deep mark. The source material mentions his father's bitterness about the political campaigns, calling them imaginary enemies and a distorted class struggle.
Absolutely. And Ren himself grew up with genuine hardship. Hunger was a real thing, constant political chaos, the Cultural Revolution. His mother even suffered severe hearing loss from untreated TB. Just surviving required resilience, political savvy, traits that, arguably showed up later in Huawei's strategy.
Which brings us to a really controversial part of his military years. This is what people in Washington point to, right?
Yeah, this is what they often call Huawei's original sin. From around 68 to 82, Ren was assigned to Base 011.
Base 011. What exactly was that?
It was this massive, top-secret military production site built literally into caves and valleys in Guizhou province. The idea was to hide sensitive stuff like fighter jet parts away from potential U.S. surveillance during the Cold War, Vietnam War era.
But Ren had an engineering degree, didn't he? Was he doing high-level tech work there?
Not initially, no. Because he was classed as an intellectual, he actually started out doing re-education. He was a cook for 2 years.
A cook?
Yeah, then a plumber. Only after that did he get to work as a technician. He studied electronics on the side. He always insisted his work there was construction, heavy industry, nothing to do with communications.
But the connection was made regardless. The link to the PLA, a secret base, that narrative stuck.
It absolutely did. It raised immediate red flags in the West about his government ties, flags that have, well, never really gone away.
But that period also seems to be when his own fortunes started to change politically. There was that science conference in 78.
Ah, yes, the National Science Conference. That was huge. It was Deng Xiaoping basically signaling a massive shift. He declared scientists weren't bourgeoisie anymore, but part of the working class.
A kind of political rehabilitation.
Exactly. Ren said he was moved to tears. It felt like a second chance for his whole generation. The message was clear. China was pivoting towards science and tech, away from endless political struggle.
And around this time, he also had a pretty significant family connection, right? His first father-in-law.
Yes, Meng Dongbo. He was the vice governor of Sichuan province.
How important were connections like that in the early days of China's market reform?
Oh, incredibly important. Probably essential for survival, honestly. Having someone like a vice governor in the family provided a level of political protection, guanxi, that could open doors, smooth things over with local officials. In that chaotic environment, you needed more than just a good idea. You needed political cover.
Okay, so after leaving the military, he heads to Shenzhen. 1987, Huawei is founded.
Right, in the Shenzhen Special Economic Zone, the SEZ.
What was Shenzhen like then?
It was the wild frontier of Chinese capitalism, deliberately set up as this sort of buffer zone, this long, thin strip next to Hong Kong, designed to suck in capital and know-how without, contaminating the mainland too much.
And Huawei started really small.
Tiny. It was a Minjian company, basically a private startup,
Founded with about 21,000 yuan, pooled by Ren and 5 others. Initially, they were just reselling telephone switches, assembling basic stuff for other companies, very low margin, very scrappy.
So important to remember, it didn't just spring out of the state budget, it started private.
It did, born out of that specific controlled capitalist experiment. But that private identity would get much more complicated very quickly.
And those early years sound legendary for their intensity, the whole mattress culture thing.
Oh, yeah. It's core to the Huawei mythos. They were renting this space in an industrial building, no air conditioning, just fans battling the Shenzhen humidity and mosquitoes. And the culture was literal. Engineers worked around the clock, and when they crashed, they slept on these dozen or so cots right there in the office. The mattresses.
It wasn't just a quirky name, it was a whole philosophy.
Absolutely. There's this anecdote, maybe apocryphal but telling, about an engineer who worked so hard his cornea detached.
That level of extreme effort, that complete dedication, was baked into the culture from day one. Ren demanded it. It was brutal, but incredibly effective for getting products out the door fast.
And they needed that speed because China's telecom market was exploding, right? Everyone wanted a phone line.
Totally. Shenzhen's phone numbers went from 4 digits to 6 almost overnight. But all the sophisticated switching gear, the stuff that made the networks run, was foreign. Ericsson, Fujitsu, Nortel, they owned the market.
So Huawei had to build its own but was still reliant on the West.
Exactly. They knew they had to develop their own switches to compete, but their early designs heavily relied on Western components. They were buying Motorola chips almost exclusively for the guts of their first switches. So this weird dependency, even as they aimed to kick the foreign giants out.
So how did they make that leap? From scrappy assembler to real competitor, was it just the hard work?
The hard work was crucial, but the big shift seems to have been political alignment. That meeting Ren had with Jiang Zemin in 1994 is often cited as the key moment.
Jiang Zemin, the general secretary at the time, what happened after that meeting?
Things just started to get easier for Huawei. Obstacles began to melt away, as the source puts it. The leadership clearly saw the strategic value in having a strong domestic player in telecom infrastructure.
And that translated into real, tangible advantages, like financing.
Yes, that was probably the biggest immediate boost. Huawei became the first company in China allowed to offer domestic buyers credit to its customers.
Which were mostly state-owned telecom bureaus, right?
Exactly. So Huawei could essentially offer loans to these state entities to buy Huawei gear. Foreign competitors needed cash up front or complex financing deals. Huawei could undercut them simply by offering credit, backed implicitly by the state. It was a game changer.
And they amplified that advantage with joint ventures, setting up partnerships with local operators.
That was the other brilliant move, creating these JVs, what Sun Yafan called a community of shared interests. It basically gave Huawei blood relations with the people buying the equipment.
There's that story about the official in Sichuan.
Perfect example. He's part of a JV with Huawei, declares, "We're all family now," and promptly rips out 40,000 lines of foreign equipment to replace it with Huawei's. Sends them 27 million yuan, no messy bidding process. That's Guangxi plus state alignment in action.
But operating in that system, with all the emphasis on Guangxi, must have been tricky. Corruption was widespread, wasn't it?
Hugely tricky. Building a clean team was apparently very difficult. And the sales culture itself was incredibly demanding physically. You had to build relationships, and that often meant drinking, specifically Baijiu.
That really strong sorghum spirit.
Yeah, like 120 proof stuff. The protocol, especially in some regions like the Northeast, was that the Huawei salesperson had to get drunker than the client, usually a local official, to show respect.
That sounds damaging.
It was. Staff apparently suffered serious stomach and liver problems. The company even shipped health supplements, propolis, to try and mitigate the damage. It's this weird collision of high-tech ambition and these really traditional, physically punishing relationship-building rituals.
And sometimes those rituals crossed the line into what looked a lot like bribery. There's that incident with the former ambassador, Li Jingxian.
Right. He met Ren in '98, and Ren's assistant apparently slipped him an envelope with $2,000 cash, calling it a personal gift for his apartment. Li Jingxian freaked out, turned it over to the foreign ministry. Ren later apologized, calling it a misunderstanding.
So was it a bribe or just cultural practice?
It's murky, right? It perfectly illustrates how blurry the lines were between legitimate relationship building gift-giving, and potential corruption in that environment.
Okay, moving towards more formal structures. Huawei also set up its own internal Communist Party branch.
Yes, in May 1996. That was pretty standard practice. Any company with 3 or more party members had to have one. By 97, about a sixth of their R&D staff were party members. It was about ensuring alignment with national goals, party ideology.
And the government's interest wasn't just economic. Security was clearly on their mind. Premier Li Peng's visit in 96.
Li Peng, yeah. Known as the Butcher of Beijing for his role in Tiananmen. He was a security hawk. And he supposedly asked Ren directly about surveillance capabilities he'd seen in movies like tracking criminal phone calls.
And Ren's answer was pretty direct.
Very direct. Ren apparently said something like, "Do you have this technology? As soon as it rings, we know, in less than a second."
Wow. So years before the big international controversies, they were openly telling top leaders about their surveillance capabilities.
Exactly. It signaled they could and would meet the security state's needs, that the technology was built with that potential in mind. That exchange became Exhibit A for Western skeptics later on.
Okay, so Huawei is growing like crazy, but Ren starts worrying. The mattress culture isn't sustainable long-term. He's concerned about his health. And there aren't really any Chinese companies that have lasted for centuries. What does he do?
He does something pretty radical for a Chinese company at the time. He hires IBM, pays them enormous consulting fees to completely overhaul Huawei's management structure and processes.
How enormous are we talking?
Ren claimed they paid something like $680 per IBM consultant per hour, which was, more than the average monthly salary for many of his own engineers at the time. It was a massive investment to import Western management practices.
And he was serious about implementing it, even if his own people resisted.
Absolutely. He famously told his managers, if the shoes don't fit, cut your feet to fit the shoes. Meaning the IBM systems, things like integrated product development, integrated supply chain, had to be followed rigorously, even if they felt bureaucratic or foreign. He wanted a structure that could outlast him.
And around this time, there's a key change in leadership, too, with Sun Yafeng becoming chairwoman in 99. She got a nickname, didn't she?
Yeah, Huawei's Secretary of State. She took on a lot of the high-level diplomatic roles, meeting world leaders, being the polished international face of the company.
But her background raised some eyebrows, connections to state security.
That's where it gets intriguing. There are inconsistencies in her official bio. In one essay, she mentioned working for the Ministry of State Security, the MSS, in communications before joining Huawei. But the dates in her official Huawei bio didn't quite line up with that, and her birth year was sometimes listed differently.
So ambiguity about her past combined with her rapid rise and diplomatic role.
Exactly. It fueled long-standing suspicions among Western intelligence agencies that maybe she had deeper ties to the security apparatus, that perhaps she wasn't just a corporate executive.
So you have this internal push to modernize, become a Western-style multinational, but key figures still have these connections to the Chinese military and possibly intelligence. That seems like a fundamental tension.
A huge tension. And it started causing international friction almost immediately as Huawei began expanding aggressively in the early 2000s.
They weren't shy about going into risky places, were they? Like Iraq.
Not at all. In 2001, they were accused of building a fiber optic network in Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which was under strict UN sanctions. The U.S. government was furious. The Pentagon apparently even ordered an airstrike on the facility Huawei was involved with.
An airstrike? Wow. Did they back off?
The U.S. issued strong warnings, but the pattern continued. Later that same year, September 2001, reports surfaced that Huawei had been building a phone system for the Taliban in Afghanistan.
Right before the U.S. invasion.
Right. It showed this willingness to operate in geopolitical vacuums, places Western companies wouldn't touch, often using components they had bought from American tech firms like Qualcomm and IBM. It was commercially opportunistic, sure, but it also showed a disregard for U.S. foreign policy concerns.
Okay, so the geopolitical temperature is rising. But then came a direct legal assault from a tech giant. Cisco sued them in 2003.
Yes, this was a massive confrontation. Cisco was, at that point, the world's most valuable tech company. And they accused Huawei, flat out, of stealing intellectual property, copying source code for routers, infringing patents, even lifting text verbatim from user manuals for their competing Quidway products.
How serious was this for Huawei?
Potentially existential. Ren put one of his top deputies, Guo Ping, in charge of the defense. A consultant warned Guo they were facing astronomical fines, possibly bankruptcy. This was a real black swan moment. Ren told Guo to channel an ancient general Han Jian, who endured humiliation to avoid a bigger fight.
What was Huawei's defense? Did they deny it?
Their official explanation was, well, widely seen as unbelievable. They claimed it was all down to a single rogue employee who'd supposedly gotten a disk with Cisco code from a third party years earlier, a one-off mistake. The court filing showed pretty blatant copying, though.
But the case just disappeared.
It was dropped in 2004. The terms weren't disclosed, which usually suggests some kind of settlement happened behind the scenes. But the damage to Huawei's reputation, especially in the U.S. tech industry, was significant. They were branded as IP thieves, making it much harder for them to be trusted, even as they were trying to project this image of a modern professional company.
Okay, so they survived the Cisco lawsuit, but the IP questions lingered. Yet they kept pushing internationally, and then in 2005, they got this enormous boost from Beijing.
Yeah, this is where you really see the state stepping in as a strategic backer. The China Development Bank, which is a state policy bank, allocated a staggering $10 billion line of credit specifically to fund Huawei's overseas expansion.
$10 billion. In 2005, how big was that relative to Huawei?
It was twice their entire global revenue from the previous year. It was an absolutely massive signal of state support.
And that wasn't just capital, it was a competitive weapon, right?
Totally. It was clear encouragement from Beijing, as the source puts it. It allowed Huawei to go to telecom operators around the world and offer incredible financing deals. Buy our gear now, pay later, with very little money down. Western competitors like Nortel or Marconi, operating on normal commercial terms, just couldn't match that kind of state-backed financial muscle.
And that money directly fueled their big breakthrough in the West. The UK deal with British Telecom BT, also in 2005.
That BT contract was everything for Huawei in Europe. Getting chosen by a major respected incumbent like BT was the ultimate seal of approval. It suddenly made them look not just cheap, but technically credible.
And that opened the floodgates elsewhere.
Immediately. After BT, they landed huge contracts with Vodafone Orange in France,
Right.
Telefonica in Spain. That BT deal basically unlocked the entire European market for them.
What did that do to their Western rivals?
It was devastating. Companies like Nortel in Canada, Marconi in the UK, they started losing contracts hand over fist. This state-backed push by Huawei definitely accelerated their decline and, in some cases, eventual collapse. Western governments were often focused on the short-term cost savings Huawei offered, perhaps not fully grasping the long-term strategic implications.
But surely putting Huawei gear deep inside national telecom networks, especially in NATO countries like the UK, raised security alarms.
Oh, absolutely. Huge concerns from intelligence agencies. Huawei's response was pretty novel. They set up something called the CEL.
The CEL, what was that?
Officially, it was the Huawei Cybersecurity Evaluation Center, HCSEC, opened near London in 2010. The idea was transparency, let British officials inspect our equipment, look for vulnerabilities, reassure yourself.
But the setup was interesting. It wasn't exactly independent, was it?
Not really. It was located very close to GCHQ, the UK's signals intelligence agency. And GCHQ didn't just oversee it, they vetted and cleared all the staff working there, many of whom were actually former GCHQ agents. GCHQ got the vulnerability reports before Huawei even saw them. One insider basically called it an arm of the British intelligence agencies.
So British intelligence was effectively running the security checks inside Huawei's own facility.
Pretty much. It's an extraordinary arrangement. But even then, they couldn't guarantee security.
Why not? If they had that level of access.
Because auditing millions of lines of code is incredibly complex. As one former researcher there said, it's very difficult to tell the difference between a backdoor and a mistake. They kept finding bugs, flaws, sloppy coding, but proving malicious intent versus just bad engineering was almost impossible. The ambiguity, the potential risk, never fully went away.
So while they're doing this delicate dance in the UK, they're still operating in much rougher neighborhoods, war zones, sanctioned states.
Absolutely. That reflects Ren Zhengfei's own ethos. He was known for visiting staff in dangerous places like Afghanistan, famously saying things like, "If I fear death myself, how can I ask you to fight heroically?" He set a very high bar for personal sacrifice and risk-taking.
And that translated into deals like the one in North Korea, codenamed A9.
Yes, they helped build North Korea's first 3G mobile network, despite U.S. sanctions being in place. They did it indirectly, routing the equipment through an intermediary company called Panda International to try and maintain deniability.
A common tactic, using intermediaries.
Seems like it. A way to operate in markets that were technically off-limits but desperate for connectivity. The Iran connection was similar, involving sales to Iran electronics industries, which was linked to the Iranian military.
And there was that photo slip-up.
Right. An internal Huawei newspaper accidentally published a photo showing a shipping label from a Chinese state company addressed to Iran Electronic Industries. Weeks later, the U.S. State Department sanctioned that very entity. It suggested Huawei was operating right up to and maybe over the line of U.S. sanctions, even if they could claim technical compliance at the exact moment of sale.
Okay, so the company is now huge, global, complex, operating in all these different environments. Ren starts thinking about succession again, the rotating CEO system.
Yeah, around 2011, he picked 3 trusted long-timers, Guo Ping, Ken Hu, Eric Xu, to take turns as CEO. His reasoning was partly about institutionalizing leadership, making the company less dependent on him personally. He joked he was getting old, might fall out of the sky,
Right.
and that a company reliant solely on its founder is miserable, hopeless, and unreliable.
But even with that system, everyone was watching his family, right? Especially his daughter, Meng Wanzhou.
Definitely. Meng, his daughter from his first marriage, had been rising through the ranks. She became CFO in 2011 and was put in charge of implementing that huge, complex IBM finance system overhaul.
Despite not having an engineering background and apparently having limited English.
Right. It was a huge responsibility, signaling her importance, even though Ren publicly downplayed the idea of family succession at the time.
This all leads up to a major confrontation point with the U.S. government, that House Intelligence Committee hearing in 2012. Charles Ding, Huawei's U.S. lead, was in the hot seat.
He really was. They grilled him about security risks, unauthorized beaconing, backdoors. Ding denied everything very firmly. The committee was trying to pin him down. Can we trust your equipment?
But the killer moment politically was about the internal Communist Party committee.
Yes. Ding confirmed its existence and named the secretary Zhu Daiki. But when pressed for the full list of members, he hesitated, saying he'd provide it later, offline. For the U.S. lawmakers, that refusal to be fully transparent about who held political influence inside the company was a massive red flag. It screamed hidden loyalties.
And then Representative Adam Schiff pushed him on Chinese law, specifically the articles requiring companies to cooperate with state intelligence agencies on inspecting equipment.
Ding claimed he wasn't familiar with the specific law. Schiff just didn't buy it, basically accusing him of being deliberately obtuse, saying he was too well informed not to know the legal obligations Huawei faced in China.
So that hearing really crystallized the U.S. position.
It did. It marked a shift. Regardless of Huawei's denials, the U.S. political establishment concluded that Chinese law itself made Huawei inherently untrustworthy. The policy of deep suspicion was now pretty much locked in.
Just when you think the relationship can't get any more fraught, we get the Snowden leaks in 2014. And the revelation about the NSA program shot giant.
Talk about irony. Here, the U.S. is accusing Huawei of being a tool for Chinese spying, and Snowden's documents reveal the NSA had been hacking into Huawei since at least 2009.
How deep did they get?
Pretty deep. They accessed Huawei's central email archive, read emails between Ren Zhengfei and Sun Yafeng, even got their hands on the company's valuable source code.
So the U.S. was doing exactly what it accused China of wanting to do through Huawei.
Precisely. Huawei's U.S. spokesman at the time, William Plummer, pointed out the hypocrisy. The irony is that exactly what they are doing to us is what they have always charged that the Chinese are doing through us.
And what was the NSA's goal, according to the documents?
2 things, mainly. First, to figure out if Huawei actually was spying for the Chinese government. And second, chillingly, to leverage Huawei presence to gain access to networks of interest. Basically, use Huawei's global footprint as a way for the U.S. to spy on other countries.
Wow. So the very entity demanding transparency was secretly compromising Huawei systems for its own espionage. Did that change the debate at all?
It certainly complicated the narrative. It showed that surveillance capabilities and the pressure governments put on tech companies aren't unique to China. It highlighted the, let's say, universal nature of state-sponsored espionage in the digital age. But it didn't really stop the U.S. campaign against Huawei.
And meanwhile, that old Iran business finally came back to bite them, leading to Meng Wanzhou's arrest. It started with a Reuters report in 2013.
Yeah, Reuters uncovered documents linking Meng Wanzhou directly to a company called Skycom, which had been operating in Iran. This directly contradicted Huawei's line that Skycom was just an independent local business partner. Meng had actually served on Skycom's board for a period.
And that triggered alarms at HSBC, the bank handling Skycom's account.
Big time. HSBC was already under a U.S. deferred prosecution agreement for other issues, so they were hypersensitive. They found internal Skycom documents, marked confidential, that explicitly stated Skycom's purpose was contracting work in Iran. That was a smoking gun for potential sanctions violations and bank fraud. HSBC shut the account down fast.
And those documents formed the basis for the U.S. charges against Meng.
Yes, the U.S. alleged she had misled HSBC about the relationship between Huawei and Skycom, causing the bank to process transactions that potentially violated U.S. sanctions against Iran.
Which led to that dramatic arrest at Vancouver Airport in December 2018.
Right. Canadian authorities arrested her based on the U.S. extradition request. The circumstances of the arrest itself became hugely controversial. Border officers detained her for 3 hours, questioned her specifically about Iran, seized her phones, laptop, USB drive, all before officially arresting her or informing her of her rights.
And there was that issue with her phone passcodes.
Yeah, a border officer wrote her passcodes down on a piece of paper, which then somehow ended up with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. Her lawyers argued this was a deliberate ploy to gather evidence improperly, violating her rights. It became a central part of her legal fight against extradition.
But in the end, it wasn't really a legal resolution, was it? It was political.
Completely. After nearly 3 years under house arrest in Vancouver, the case ended abruptly in 2021. Meng reached a deferred prosecution agreement with the U.S. Department of Justice, admitting some wrongdoing regarding the misrepresentations to HSBC, but not pleading guilty to fraud, and the extradition request was dropped.
And just hours later,
the two Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, two Canadians who had been detained in China shortly after Meng's arrest, in what was widely seen as hostage diplomacy, were released and flown home. Meng flew back to China. It looked exactly like a prisoner swap.
And her return to China was treated as a major victory.
Oh, huge. Giant billboards in Shenzhen welcomed her home. She had endured hardship for the company, for the country. That suffering was immediately converted into political capital. And then, in April 2023, she took her first turn as rotating chairwoman. She wasn't just the founder's daughter anymore. She was a symbol of resilience against Western pressure.
While all this high-stakes geopolitical drama was playing out, more information was emerging about Huawei's role in Xinjiang.
Yes, it became increasingly clear that Huawei was a key technology supplier for China's surveillance state, targeting the Uyghur population in Xinjiang. They provided networks, cloud infrastructure, cameras, even facial recognition algorithms used in the region.
And there was concrete proof linking their tech specifically to Uyghur tracking.
There was. A confidential test report from 2018 surfaced, detailing interoperability testing between Huawei and a partner company, Megvai. The report explicitly mentioned testing a function called Uyghur Alarm and marked it as passed.
An Uyghur Alarm? That sounds pretty damning.
It was direct evidence that the system was designed, by specific intent, not by accident, to identify and flag people based on their ethnicity. It showed Huawei's technology was integral to the mechanics of the repression.
How did Huawei respond to accusations of complicity in human rights abuses?
Their public stance, articulated by their global cybersecurity officer, John Suffolk, was essentially one of legalistic detachment. He said things like, "I do not think it is for us to make such judgments. Our judgment is it legal within the countries in which we operate?"
So basically, if it's legal under local law, even if that law facilitates repression, it's not their place to question it.
That was the message. A kind of moral vacuum, as the source material describes it, prioritizing legal compliance over ethical considerations about how their technology was being used.
And yet, amidst all this ethical and geopolitical turmoil, technically, Huawei reached the absolute pinnacle with 5G.
They really did. Through massive, sustained R&D investment, they achieved clear technological leadership in 5G. They were early and aggressive adopters of key technologies like polar codes, invented by Turkish professor Erdal Arıkan. They amassed a huge portfolio of standard essential patents, or SEPs.
Why are SEPs so important in this world?
Because if you own patents that are essential to making a technology standard like 5G work, then anyone building 5G products, phones, network gear, anything, has to license your patents and pay you royalties. Huawei built up such a dominant position in 5G SEPs that rivals simply couldn't design around them. The chief architect at BT famously called Huawei the only one true 5G supplier.
But that technical dominance made them an even bigger target for the U.S., which led to the really tough sanctions in 2020.
Exactly. The U.S. Commerce Department tightened the screws, basically banning the sale of any advanced semiconductors to Huawei if those chips were made using U.S. technology or equipment, which covered almost the entire global supply chain, crucially including the Taiwanese giant TSMC.
That was supposed to be the knockout blow, right? cut off their access to advanced chips, cripple their 5G business, kill their high-end smartphone division.
That was clearly the intent. A death blow. And for a while, it looked like it might work. But then came Huawei's own black swan moment, or maybe a counterattack.
The Mate 60 Pro phone in 2023.
Exactly. They launched this new high-end smartphone, and teardowns revealed it contained a sophisticated 7-nanometer processor capable of 5G speeds, apparently manufactured domestically in China by Semic.
Despite the U.S. sanctions designed to prevent exactly that.
Despite the sanctions. It showed that Huawei and China's domestic chip industry had found some way to produce relatively advanced chips, likely by pushing older manufacturing equipment, DV lithography, to its absolute limits. The source compares it to trying to paint a very fine line using a fat brush. Difficult, maybe not optimal, but possible.
So a major statement of resilience.
A huge statement. It
Right.
demonstrated that while the U.S. could inflict pain and slow them down, they couldn't completely choke off China's technological ambition or Huawei's ability to innovate, even under immense pressure. Hashtag outro, synthesize and connect.
So looking back at this whole story, Huawei is just full of contradictions, isn't it? Incredible engineering speed, efficiency, achieving these monumental tasks, but also entangled with state power, espionage fears, ethical controversies, facing these huge geopolitical headwinds.
It really is a case study in those contradictions. And that central question about trust and potential espionage, it sort of remains unanswerable in a definitive way. There's that quote from the exiled Chinese entrepreneur Juan Runnin, who pointed out that fundamentally any communication system has a back end that could be used for eavesdropping.
And he noted that even in the U.S., tech companies face gag orders preventing them from revealing government demands.
Right. The technical capability for surveillance is pretty much universal. The real difference is the political system wielding it and the legal constraints, or lack thereof, around its use.
Huawei's rise, fueled by that unique mix of entrepreneurial drive and state backing, really did feel like a Sputnik moment for the West, didn't it?
Absolutely. It shattered the post-Cold War assumption that free markets and democracy were the inevitable endpoint. It forced a global rethink, a return to ideas about industrial policy, strategic technologies, and direct state competition that had faded for a while.
Which brings us to a final thought, maybe looking forward. Ren Zhengfei set up the rotating leader system specifically because he worried about a company being too tied to one person, saying it makes the enterprise miserable, hopeless, and unreliable.
Right. He wanted the system to be stronger than the individual founder.
But now, his daughter, Meng Wanzhou, who endured that detention, became a national symbol and carries the founder's name, is rotating into the top leadership role. So the question is, can Huawei maintain that ruthless efficiency and technical edge under this new dynamic, relying on the system Ren built, even as he inevitably steps back further and the global environment remains deeply hostile? Can the institution truly transcend the founding soul?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? It defines the next phase not just for Huawei, but for this whole global tech contest.
Definitely something to keep watching. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.